Boker Tov, Shalom, Erev Tov here in Jerusalem. Wonderful to be together again in a second webinar in a series that addresses a challenging question, I think, both here in Israel and throughout the Jewish community. And it had to do with gender equality, sex separation, segregation, and different people prefer different labels. 2 weeks ago, we had Professor Yofi Tirosh, a leading activist in the efforts, the legal efforts, public efforts to curtail or eliminate gender segregation altogether in the academia and beyond. You are welcome to listen or listen again to the recording. We sent it out as part of the Chidush newsletter on Thursday, but we will again refer to it as a follow-up to this webinar. Today, we are truly privileged to have a wonderful thought leader, trendsetter, scholar, feminist, friend, who will present a different perspective. And some years ago, I reached out to Professor Tova Hartman to hear more about her take. And she impressed me immensely. I was impressed with her before. We have met before and since. But she impressed me immensely as to the essence of her position, which is based both on ideology and on experience. So Professor Tova Hartman is Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Ono Academic Center. She is a leading feminist, especially in indeed setting new initiatives in the area of feminism and religion. And for those who visit Jerusalem and attend Shira Hadasha synagogue, which is one of those pioneering modern Orthodox synagogues that has done a lot in terms of providing a role, a dignified participatory role for women. Tova is one of the founders of this synagogue. So we'll start with an initial presentation of about half an hour, dealing with both the Supreme Court ruling, which was sort of the peg on which we hung these two-part series, the landmark ruling of the Supreme Court, which addressed 4 different petitions that tried to pull the court in different directions to either allow expanding the scope of separation, the gender separation in the academia, or block it. And the question is, what is Professor Hartman's take on the significance of the court ruling? No one was fully satisfied, though both sides sort of saw it, presented it as a victory. We'll hear Tova's unique perspective, but just as importantly, we'll hear from her how she sees the need and the benefits emanating from a level of acceptance of gender separation. And then we'll ask her questions. You are welcome to use the chat, and we'll try to introduce questions as she finishes. And one more important thing, and that is we are privileged to be running these webinars with partners. Our regular partners are Ruach Chidush, Rabbis and Cantors for Religious Freedom and Equality in Israel, and I'm delighted to know that Rabbi Rachel Yurevitz is with us, and I'm not sure, I haven't really seen all the names on those on the screen. We may have additional board members, executive committee members with us. JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action, the JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, and Judge Peter Buxbaum and Mark Enshen are on our co-chairs, together with David Light. And we have a special privilege in the last two webinars to have as co-sponsors JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, and we are grateful to Daphne Price-Lazar, the executive director, who may already be with us, I haven't seen, but it's wonderful to partner with JOFA. That is such an important organization in advancing the cause and the scope of activity of Jewish Orthodox feminists. So, Tova, the microphone is yours and we are all yours.
Okay. So hi, it's really a privilege to be here with you and to try to present my perspective on this very complicated and challenging issue where there's really no one answer that would make all of us feel good. But I think I'd like to begin with an example of what happened to me about 5 years ago. I'm the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, and in our college we have a large Haredi campus. We have a few large Haredi campuses, and we opened up a Haredi School of Education as well. And I was asked to come to a Haredi men's class because there was a lot of difficulty in that class in accepting the curriculum that we gave. There were a lot of what we call gewalts. We can't read this, we can't do this. How are you forcing us to do things? And since I'm the dean, and it doesn't matter if I'm a woman or man, I was the one who was invited to try to help them or to try to answer what our policy was of curriculum, etc. And I will be very honest that I was so pissed at them because I worked so hard to get this curriculum going. You know, there was just this sense, do they have no, what we call hakarat hatov, do they have no appreciation of all the different kinds of pretzels we're turning ourselves into to make this program work? And what are they just kvetches? And what, you know, I had a whole thing and I'm going to show them. And I had all my, you know, I'm going to counter Talmud them and show them all these different examples in the Talmud where they're really wrong, where they really don't know. And I was, you know, coming in that. And it was really good that it took me a while to get to the campus because I was able to remember and go back and remember what it was that we were trying to do, what it is that we're trying to do. And I don't need to teach them Gemara. That's not what's necessary for them. And I don't need to try to prove to them how narrow-minded or stupid they are or any of those kinds of things. And I came into the class and it was the first time this had ever happened to me. There was one man standing, he was the class representative, and I would say almost the whole class greeted me like this. They would not even look up to see me. And there was the class representative who stood up, who was angry would be an understatement, but super articulate and really like going one after another. How do you dare do this? How do you dare do this? We can't study this. What do you think you are? You said, and I listened and I was able to be quiet because very often I'm very combative. Right away, I'm stucking back at everybody else. But I really was able to listen, and it really dawned on me that I need to help them understand, not only sign up for university, but to help them understand some of the hows and whys of the curriculum. How do I see it? What do I think will happen to them if they actually take the curriculum seriously? And it was really, I had a very long conversation. It was with this class representative, and I gave them examples about adolescents at risk that they study and the whole notion of diversity and just many different things, how I thought that they will all be enhanced. And I wasn't talking at them, I was trying to be with them in their fears and how I believed that their educational systems will be enhanced if they go through our program. This program was specifically for what we call, we're for malamdim in the cheders in Mea Shearim. These weren't students at the law school who wanted to get a better at life and stuff. These were people who are in education, and they were coming to study, to study a BA in education. And as I continued, and I slowly, I would say a little more than half, like sat up, and would look at me. And then they began another conversation. At the end of the class, I didn't only, I think they understood, or many understood, what it is that they need to do, what it is that I'm committing myself to them. And I said, I don't only want you for your BA, I want you to continue for your MA. I don't want you to not be Haredi. If any of you stop being a Haredi, it's a failure. I want you to be Haredi, and I want for you to go back and improve your educational systems. I want you to go back and be able to tell who is an adolescent at risk, who is at risk for falling out of the system, who's at risk to be on the streets. I want you to be able to go back and say, we cannot treat autistic children the way we have, or now that it's like a little better in the Haredi world, we'll have a little institution and we'll close the key there. How do we integrate them in our classes? And I want you to be able to do that. And I don't want you to only stay for your BA, I want you to stay for your MA with us, and we're going to together make change. Now, I just want to bring you 5 years later, the person who stood, who was the class representative, who was the most articulate, nasty, ifcha mistabra, every single thing that is going to be gevalt, it's bemet, it's shmad, the way he related to how we're studying. He finished his MA with us. He's the head of the Haredi campuses in education. He was in charge in Beitar Elite of adolescents at risk in the Haredi world, and he's now developed what he's doing. He teaches a joint class in the so-called mixed campus, where there's religious, non-religious Arabs. He teaches it. His partner for teaching it, and his partner now, they're going to be writing something on certain aspects of adolescents at risk, is a woman who is a lesbian woman who is a rabbi. It's almost like a character, and I didn't mean it that way, but she's a completely secular woman who's studying now. There's a small program in Jerusalem, 4 students a year, to become a secular rabbi. There's such a thing now as Rabbanut Chilonit, and she's studying, and together they are working. And if you're to see him, it's like you want to just say, so he is what I might call, and I'm, so as our poster can be our poster child of a Haredi, that he has to deal with a lot of narrow mindedness when he comes into a secular class where students are not necessarily Haredi, how they look at him. He dresses differently, he acts differently, and he's also teaching now adolescents at risk in the regular campus. So I'm using this real example. His name is Arav Pinchas Cohen. We study together. I'm hoping, and he's hoping, that he can start a doctorate soon. He has to work on his English, and he's still Haredi completely. Now, he studied in Brisk, Yeshiva. What I'm giving this not to say that everything is finished and everybody's fabulous who graduates and they've all gone through and everything is this and everybody's open-minded, but it's important for me when we speak about this issue, we're speaking about people. We're speaking about people who are very different than me. And my thought is not a theoretical model, but in fact, a certain commitment to how can we really create change in Israeli society? And for me, the overarching question is not segregation, but it's really another question, and that is, how does a liberal democracy that all of us are completely committed to and need to develop? And I do want to say the people who went to the Bagatz, to the Supreme Court, to try to close my programs and have attacked that these must be closed because they had their Gewalt, because that's the end of Israel's democracy. But they are really, one must say, these really are a lot of the watchdogs of Israeli democracy. I don't, we are all dependent upon their activism in this. And I'm very much appreciated. I think in this matter, they were wrong, but I very much appreciate also the incentives and what they're trying to do, not just in this specific issue. Now, the larger context is, how does a liberal democracy relate to illiberal groups within it? Is there room for them? How do they relate? And many political theorists, such as Walzer, Charles Taylor, have really written many books and have asked many questions. What is the relationship between this liberal democracy and those groups within it who are not liberal and who do not abide by it? And I would say even more, not only do they not abide by it, but they do not accept the same rules of the game. I would not say that, wow, and if they are in power, would they help me to get sitters for Shira Hadasha? I have to say right from the start, they will not. They will not, and they do not abide by the same rules of the game. Now, that's a general question. What do we do in all issues when we deal in issues with Palestinians? But are we now in a place where we're all agreeing on the rules of the game, but then we just have different solutions, or not? I'm very honest, and I know that first conversation I had with the Haredi class, I want to say it continues every year. There's incredible students that come out. There's a lot of difficulties. I often am attacked from all different ways of different things. And so I really don't want to say this is the next answer to, it's the best next thing after the wheel or any of those things. I'm not minimizing the challenges, and I'm not saying that, I have the answer, but I'd like to share with you some of our thoughts and how do I experience relationships to groups that are not liberal in a liberal society. Okay. Now, in terms of the specifics of higher education, excuse me, there were a few main points that it's important to relate to the people who wanted to close these maslulim, these programs, these campuses, who wanted to close the Haredi campuses in higher education. Now, one of the things, their basic things, is that this segregation cannot be equal for men and women. Whenever there is segregation, women are always hurt, and there will always be discrimination. There is no such thing as segregated and equal. Now, I do know that most situations that is true, but that doesn't have to be. For someone who's very involved in education, I taught all the grades. It's just very important to understand that when they wanted to, improve women's young girls and actually adolescent girls in the maths and in physics, a few kibbutzim went into the segregated model and taking the girls out so that they could study on their own. There's a secular high school now that's opened in Jerusalem for girls. That, there was some assumption that still, even though we would like to believe that, the place of high school is for socializing, and so basically we're going to do a socialization thing so that our students will learn how to deal in a world where there's boys and girls and different kinds of competition. But the last word has not been said in that matter in terms of having segregated education that will actually support girls and women. There's many different studies, and there's a lot of research being done. It's one of my fields. At some point, we sort of came up with some kind of a strange declaration, and that is, it's always good to be with girls. For boys, it's better to study with girls, and for girls, it's better to study with girls. And in terms of some of the things that they can achieve, I don't completely agree with it, and I think that there's many studies who can show other things, but I just want it to be said here that the notion that segregation precludes a discrimination and there cannot be equal but separate does not have to be the case, even though it often was the case, right? I mean, just women in universities, women in college. I mean, we know that is that just doesn't happen. It doesn't have to happen. I'd like to put it that way, that it doesn't have to happen. Now, the comparison to segregated schools in the United States with African Americans is this very superficial, I think a silly comparison. In certain schools, you couldn't come to a mixed school. You were forced to be in a segregated class. It's like, it's comparing apples and not just tangerines, it's like comparing apples and cars. This is a situation where nobody is forced to come anywhere. Segregation, when it is forced, is a very serious problem. Here, we are not trying, and those of us who are supporting Haredi campuses are not trying to change the universities. What we're trying to say is there room in the academy, is there room in an academic institution to offer other classes? So I think that is really the difference. I would never try to change Hebrew University or I mean, even though all the universities in Israel do have Haredi campuses, some admit they do and some keep it secret, which is well known. People are getting degrees from Tel Aviv University after they've learned in a little school in Bnei Brak, but that's a different topic, what actually happens between the universities. But the question is, do I, Tova, or those of us who are supporting the Haredi campuses want to make changes in the regular universities? The answer is, of course not. This is another option for another group. Another claim was that if we didn't offer this, they would all go to the regular universities. And they even have a few studies for someone who teaches methodology. I'm not going to go into the quote science of these studies. Some of them are a little better, some are not as good, that are showing that many students, which is a claim that I would disagree with, but a claim that if we didn't have the separate campuses, Haredi students would now all be in the regular campuses. Well, you can look in the United States where this happens, and Haredim are not running to universities. The Haredim, since we opened it, there's thousands and thousands of students who are coming and getting an academic education, who have another chance in life to do other things. So, one might say theoretically, if this wasn't, they might, then that's also. Another thing also that is very important for me to say again, and I'd like to reiterate it again. What this is also, and the process has taught me to reflect upon my own education and the accessibility that I have to a higher education and that my daughters have to a higher education, and what is privilege and how do I relate that to other people, is something that really, it's something that I take very seriously. And that is, I would like to be very honest here. I'm a very privileged woman. I'm not guilty, but I'm privileged. I had the option to study in the best universities. I was able to choose which universities. I was able to choose, starting, of course, being the daughter of my father, of course, I had to have my MA in Jewish in Jewish philosophy, and then I could go on and study psychology and other things like that. So, but I did have theoretically a free choice. And I really had access. I had financial access. I had chutzpah access. Of course, I'll sign up to go to Harvard. Why not? I had that sense. It was mine. It was a place that I could go to. It was a place that I knew I could be welcomed in. I grew up in that language. I could choose to go and not to go. My daughters, I'm not Haredi at all. I'm just Misortit woman. My daughters, I would not want them to go. I mean, they did go to I do have to say, segregated girls' high school, and I think they got an incredible education, and I'm very grateful for it. But they went on to the army, whatever they did in their life afterwards, and they are not in Haredi campuses. It's not, again, it was very important for me to say this, and I'd like us to, all of us, to repeat that in our head. It's not about me. There are many things in the Haredi world that, honestly, I know more now. The more I'm in it, the more I don't, and I don't want to just, belittle things, but it's very not for me. And it wasn't for my children. But I'm very aware, being in, especially in a campus that is a multicultural campus, where almost a third of our students are Arab students, very high percentage of our students. In the other campuses, we have a few thousand Haredi students. We work, on large. We have 6 campuses in Israel, and I'm learning about other people, where they come from. And the question that I needed to say as an academic, as a dean, was, am I saying you are all invited to come, but you're really only invited if you are like me? And if you're not like me, basically you're not invited. And that's the thing that I need to keep on saying to myself. And I know that this also touches on many very open, exposed wounds. And I'd like to relate to that as some of the points that they discussed in the Bagat. When dealing with the Haredi community, they are not like a regular minority, like Alla Waltzer's and Chuck Taylor's books. These are a small minority, but a group that has enormous political power and wield a lot of political power in the government. So we can't talk about them as just, we need to keep, these are a small, disenfranchised group. So that is, they are not. They, as a group, one might say, they have enormous and wield more power. So to this, I'd like to say a couple of things. First of all, yes, as a Haredi representatives, they have way over their, how much they are in the population to the kind of power that they wield in our lives. So we're dealing with something different. But then I'd like to say there's a question of, what is that different thing? Are the politicians them? When I teach a class of women teachers from Beis Yaakov, and we talk about, do their politicians represent them or not, is another question. And I think it's important that we don't jump to who are they and who are their politicians as if it's all one. And in spite of their politicians are against the mixed campuses, by the way, are against the Haredi campuses. They're very against our campuses, and they fought on every level in order not to allow us to open up these campuses. So the question, who are these students? And what do we have a responsibility as a liberal democracy to enable them to get an education or not, without changing any of our other academic environments? I think that's very, very important. It's very important that this is not, if we open up a Haredi campus, does this mean that someone else is discriminated against? And the answer to this, in my opinion, is completely no. Now, there was another subject, and that was one of the things said, this is, and it sort of connects to what I was just talking about, and that is the slippery slope. It was very funny for me, I just have to say, when they were talking about the slippery slope, because the rabbis always attacked me in the shul that a group of us started, and the way I live and all these things. As you know, you're going to start having an aliyah in shul, and now it's the slippery slope to hell. Everybody's converting to Christianity. Yeah, I really wanted my daughter to say Ashrei in the morning, and that's it. They're all becoming, they're all converted. I mean, it was such a ridiculous kind of thing. And I just kept on saying the notion of the slippery slope. I always said, Rabbi, I just to tell them I didn't really fight with them that much, because I just didn't feel like fighting at that point. I felt like creating, not responding, was that the slippery slope also goes upwards. And so I actually think that when women want to feel equal in a synagogue and their experiences of equality, the spiritual slippery slope can go also upwards. And it was like, it was funny to me a little bit that people were using that same language now. Again, if you're going to give Haredim an education, a separate education, it's the slippery slope to everything else that will be bad in Israeli society, because Haredim are going to ask for more, and they will ask for more. Now, this is something that I have felt for a very long time, and I'd like to be very out there. This is the first government in a long time that Haredim aren't part of. If the Haredim have an unequal amount of power in the government, the person who's responsible, the people who are responsible for it, is us. They can ask for whatever they want to ask for. But the fact that the rabbinate in Israel is still hopefully it will change a little, is still the only official rabbinate. Who gives them their power? Who pays their salaries? Who is it? All of us. It's because the political structure in Israel, they hate each other, the left and right, or however you want to call it, hate each other so much, they'd all rather have Haredim as part of their coalition, pay them off in whatever it is they pay off, and then do what they need to do. So here I find that it's really high time that we all looked inwards, and those of us who live in Israel and those of us who are supporting Israel, and say, secular and liberal Israel, you have betrayed the liberal cause. It's you, because you refuse to sit together and finally have 2 or 3 cadenciot where we will not fund the rabbinate that does not give equality to women. We will not fund these things. This is done. And until that is, from Meretz to Likud, to Gidon Sar, to everybody else who's lovely and less lovely, and it doesn't matter what your political inclinations are, is that slippery slope and their desire to have more power and to do things that are so offensive to so many of us, we are responsible for it. And unless we take responsibility and demand of our politicians, stop having, whatever kinds of coalition agreements that sell out liberal human dignity. And that is the problem, not the fact that Haredim are getting an education and therefore they're going to have so much more power now, because guess what's going to happen? They will have power if it is given to them in a coalition agreement. They will not have power if it's not. Now, I think that one of the questions that we always have to ask, who and how, and it's something I just began before and I just will develop it a drop, is who is hurt by allowing Haredim to be in separate campuses? Is somebody
and Tova, I think that the angle that you have shared with me, which was so impressive, and I think is unknown to most of the people on this webinar, is it's not just Haredim. There is another important segment in the population. So if you refer to them as well. I will talk
about that soon. What do we do? But that's also, as I said, that we have to do that very under the radar, because they don't have a representation. But I will speak about that. I will, but I just want to speak about the exact thing first of, is anybody hurt? So, of course, I think nobody is hurt. If I would even say, like, even in a public swimming pool, when there's 2 hours a day that, are given to segregated swimming, and it could be, that's the only chance I have to come with my family, I am then going to be hurt if there is segregated swimming. If on the sidewalks I'm told X or Y, I am going to be offended. I think that enabling this community to study is one of the only things that will heal Israeli society and make sure we have some kind of robust economic future. There's another subject that people relate to, and that was very important, and that was in the psak din, that was in the verdict that was handed out, and that was the idea was it is discriminatory against women, because in the Haredi context, women cannot teach men, but men can teach women, and therefore we will then women academics will be less able to have jobs, because it's, we'd rather obviously hire men because they can do both. So what I would say is I'm very glad and very grateful that the Supreme Court did discuss that. This is something that I've already changed in Ono, in our School of Education. Now it's almost completely in law. I looked, there was one case that's not, but that is that women can teach women and men can teach men. So that there is no discrimination against women, because we need the women and they will teach whoever they teach. Again, I wanted to also just to remember, do I think this is the best way to do things? I'm not talking about that. Now, but it's a way. It's a way, and do I think it should be closed? No. I would like to also suggest that there are many other communities who come when you begin to listen to differences and you begin to say, how do I make higher education accessible to other groups because of the experience with the Haredim and because of the questions that we have to ask? we then begin to discuss other minorities. And some of these minorities can be Bedouin women. How do we enable, I'm just talking a very small group, even though it's a very large group in Israel, but I'm saying, how do we invite other groups? How do we make sure that higher education will be accessible to other minorities in Israel? It comes from the question of what is privilege, what is higher education, and who do we want to have access to this world of knowledge? And once we ask that question, we begin to look, who are our teachers? In the School of Education, for example, and I'm putting this in brackets, but it's not completely in brackets. A third of our teachers are Arab teachers, of the professors in the university. And why? Because there has to be an active recruitment of minorities if you want to have integrity in the claim that you want to be a multicultural campus. Now, I'd like to have two more points, and then I'd love to have questions. I'd like to say that I use the term that I learned called the M&Ms, the manyness and messiness of multicultural education. I want to say that it's not something that I could say, okay, got the solution, I'm going to tell you how we do it, and everybody else can do it. It's not, it would be a lie if I said that. There are many complexities. There's times that I leave the campus crying, I can't bear it, I made so many mistakes, because there is no textbook that's helping us understand this. There's a theoretical claim against us that this will lead to A, B, and C. And I hope that you have heard that it doesn't necessarily have to lead to A, B, and C, and there could be other possibilities of understanding. But it's important really to talk about this messiness and this manyness, because I cannot give like this clear, neat picture about how everything is functioning and everything's going to do well, because it's not, and things are changing. Can I say, like a graduate of ours, he's the grandson of one of the biggest Rebbeim. He started a new Beis Yaakov system based on the fact that he understood things from what happened in his education. There are others who continue to be as negative as they can, feel that they can cheat, because even though the cheating is a universal issue in the academies, but their justification is because I can cheat because it's from them. Like, you're the goyim, so it's not even a religious issue. Don't even speak to me about you made vadat or anything like that. You're them. So there still is a lot to discuss. There's a lot to think about, but I think that we are creating a difference. We are making a difference. And I don't think that the traditional academic institutions have made that commitment to diversity, in the sense that saying, what does it mean if I bring in different students? I used to say to Uri, go sit into classes, in many classes in the universities, and just write down who is speaking in class, which students are speaking, from where are they? Are the minorities, and we don't have to go into how many different ones, are they raising their hands? Are they participating? So what I'm saying is that when you want to create an environment that really doesn't just sing diversity and doesn't just say, wow, we have a few of X, Y, or Z, but really try to see, what does it mean in education? I would like to ask you if you'd like to join us in this experiment, not in all the solutions. It's an experiment, and we work on ourselves for the dignity of many different kinds of people. And so I am very grateful to the Supreme Court, even though I was sorry that of all cases of equal rights in Israel, and of really of respect for women especially, that the subject that was taken was to close the institutions in which they're getting a higher education, and spend so much energy and so much of their time on that, and not on some of the other acute things that I think I would rather have seen it done. But again, I do want to conclude that the people who did bring this to the Supreme Court are the people who we all owe them They are the watchdogs of democracy and liberalism in Israel. And I just think in this matter, they were mistaken. So I would like to now end because I'm sure that you have questions and I'm going to try to answer them. What I'd like to say is I usually prefer, if that's possible, to take like a few questions at once, not like just the ping pong, like 3 or 4 at once, if that is okay for you. Orion, you will now cut the net.
All right. So first of all, I am not sure, I might have somehow skipped a few seconds or a few minutes of your talk. I don't think so. But I don't think you've addressed the issue of Arab students. And I think it's very important because we associate this topic with the Haredi society and the Haredi politicians and the Haredi pressure, which is all very true, but I think your experience shows that the picture is even more complex than we look at it. The other question that I want to pose to you is, again, looking at the larger picture. All right, so you have male students who would not be studying together with women because of whatever. And I don't know if you can define why exactly are they refusing to study if women are also present and listening to the class. But shouldn't we say that if that is the case, then it's wonderful that they get the education, but we as a society, as a civil society, should be very careful to block them from entering civil service because if they are not capable of providing equal service and equal acceptance of men and women together, then it's wonderful. They can be scientists or whatever, but not work in civil service.
Okay.
And let me just add, you wanted to, put a few questions together. So Janine is asking, if in the secular institution, the school has a set of rules that all must follow, if some women set up self-selected sitting areas only for females in the classroom, fine. The secular school should not establish sex-segregated classrooms. Namely, I guess if it's voluntary, that's one thing, but if the school sets the system, then is it not a problem? And Kathy is asking, I so agree that those of us who support diversity must make room for people who are truly diverse from us on ideology and politics, etc. Not just those from different racial and ethnic backgrounds who have the same views as us. And because you sort of opened the door, Judge Baxbaum is asking, all right, so how do we create the momentum that would relieve the Haredim of their political clout and be able to have Israel pursue the path of, of the Declaration of Independence, of freedom of choice and equality? Okay. I mean, do you have a prescription? That was really the question.
As I said, and it was very important for me to say, I don't speak about prescriptions. I don't speak about those kinds of truths. I've gone through too much in my life and I've tried too many social experiments to say I have the prescription. But I think I've learned certain things what I wouldn't do and some things that I would try to begin to do. So now the issue of Arab students in the academy, and I'll start with Uri's question because it's another minority that basically the Ramatkal of Israel said is another generation of the Haredim and the Arab students are not going to be in the workforce. We're really in trouble. It's a much bigger danger to Israeli society than any threat possible. Now, when we say about Arab students, we say, come, learn a year of Hebrew and just go on and be who you are in the classrooms. We're all welcoming you. We're hugging you. We're loving you. We're giving you a little bit of help. And in fact, I think there's a lot of goodwill, I would like to say about that, but there's really not that many good educational practices that are accessible and that are working for a large part of the Arab population. Now, a small percentage, those who are really fabulous students and did really well in their schools, are doing great in the universities and are starting to integrate into the workforce. In the medical school, there's a few in Tel Aviv, in the law schools, there is that elite class. But if you care about social change, I think that we need to address more than an elite class. And I was actually really, I was taken aback by the amount of Arab students that applied to Ono, who have graduated from high schools in the north, not only in East Jerusalem, another whole thing, and we have over 1,500 students from East Jerusalem. How little Hebrew they know. And I understood then that Hebrew, first of all, is their third language. After literary Hebrew, Arabic, and spoken Arabic, then comes Hebrew. Their literary Arabic is very, very poor. How do we teach Hebrew, I'd like to say, which is a language of the enemy? The Ulpan books are all, as they say, Anu banu artza livnotu libanot ba, and all the wonders of all of what Hebrew can do to people who have experienced Hebrew as the language that has oppressed them, as a community that has totally oppressed them. How do we teach Hebrew? How do we create dialogue in the class? I mean, what I've insisted on is we begin and we learn about others, but we all learn with others and from others in using that term. And we talk about the Arab students and the Haredi students. And I'd like to just give you another vignette, because these are things that happen all the time as I said, in the field. And I'm going to say some nice things. If you'd like, I could share some really horrible failures. But another beautiful thing now was in this period where things were really, really, as you know, in Yaffo, in Lod, things were like exploding all over. Women from the Haredi campus, with women from the so-called general campus and many from East Jerusalem, got together and together, Haredi woman and an Arab woman together, this one with the tichel this way, the other with the tichel that way, were leading groups of Arab and Jewish students together. And really talking about the situation. People told us, Tov, you are nuts, it's going to blow up, leave it, it's too important an issue. And I just said, if it blows up, then it will blow up. The next year, we're going to do it again and learn. We will not change this program. And it really was an incredible program. Again, I'm not saying the Mashiach is coming, but I'm saying, I think that the Haredi women felt held enough in the first 2 years of their studies and were offered to do this and were given tools to do this and took the fact that they're different and some of the constraints in their life are different, gave them tools. And then we did the similar thing with an Arab group of students. And it really was, again, not the Mashiach, but a very serious encounter and a serious time of leadership that I know could only have happened because the women had been held before, that it was offered to them. We took seriously it doesn't just, this Hine Matova Manayim does not just happen. And you need a lot of education and help and support and safe spaces to go back for it to even have a chance. So I'd like to, now, schools have sets of rules, and of course they do, and we have to abide those rules. So the question is, nobody's going against those rules. There are situations, though, and I have to say it happens in our university and it happens everywhere, that you can come into a class and it has happened. And I do have to say the first time it happened in a serious way, I made every mistake that a teacher could make. And it should have been, I think it should have been filmed to say what not to do but there was a religious Zionist woman who covered her hair in whatever way it was very, spoke about freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want, which is also another subject that when we talk about diversity and freedom of speech, a very difficult subject. It's not something that, of course, everybody has the right to express themselves. And you really do horrible things just with your words to other people in the room. But do they have the right? Someone said, I don't want to sit next to an Arab student. So my intuition was just get out. You're not, that's it. It's nice that I'm giving you back your tuition. Leave the university. You have no place. This is not even a conversation that can be. And I was so, it was like, and it was after I taught the multicultural class, it was like really, I took it in that place, and you're from, and you think you're from, and there's certain things that we're allowed to say, you're not allowed to say, and you're not allowed to do. You don't like it, go somewhere else. Some of my colleagues, and I just want to say, we have a whole conversation going on in the college. That what do we do in these situations now? How do we respond to these kinds of really horrible, I don't even know how to else to word, just garbage pail talk. I have nothing else to say. That's filled with stereotypes, that's mean, that's cruel, that I think will bring the end to Israel and everything else. Do we? So it just give you an example, just an Ono now, what we've done is that the teacher then is told to stop the class. You can say, after this, I cannot continue the class again. And then we have a team of teachers who will then go into the class, the next class, who will start working on what is expected in Ono, what's possible, etc. So, in some sense, but I still will keep that question. You can, that there are certain things that just to say, okay, this is what you think. As many other academic institutions, go find yourself another place. We don't do this here. You know what I mean? But, I get it. I teach trauma, and I have a student, he's, doesn't matter from which community, he basically said if a woman was raped, then she's like a secondhand car. Of course, in our community, we don't marry women who have been raped. And you just want to say, I just, excuse me, that garbage that cannot come out of your mouth. I don't care what you want to say, that this is what the imam, whatever the community leader is going to say, it just doesn't interest me. Here, if you say that, you're out. So I'm just saying that's also a question when we talk about diversity, inclusion, exclusion, what gets said, how gets said. Again, when we try to make a rule book, it doesn't always work. It really doesn't work. Now, Judge Buxbaum, I would just like to say, do I have the, the prescription of how do we how do we limit the power of Haredim? I would say that we choose our battles well, and we stop spending all our fabulous people who want to, who are working for civil rights and for equal rights, not to take a college to court, who's trying to make an education for Haredim, but try to really change the political system in Israel. Bring that to court. Spend all your efforts on trying to say and to educate our politicians in our communities to say, don't give up on civil rights. For a coalition agreement, we have given up on the core.
Well, actually, Peter Buxbaum's question was, how do you convince the voters to vote this way?
No, how do we convince them? This past election, there was a little bit of a change. And I would say the people on the left in this election behaved so responsibly and in such way of leadership in terms of saying we're going to sit and we're going to be together without the Haredim. I think that they have to continue doing that to have a conversation and not give in. I mean, I think not everything is legitimate. And I think that one can convince the voters, again, if we talk with them and not at and then see in what we do. I think that many voters, if you saw how few people went out to vote, and we have to get the Arab population to vote. We have to get many people out there to vote, and then we do have a chance. Now, I would like to just also relate to where you did ask another question. It's not that I didn't want to talk. What happens in work? I think that it's really okay to say that this is not hurting anybody else, the university, the access to higher education. If there's any behavior in any institution that has discrimination, it has to be dealt with right away. Now you're going to ask me, but what's the difference between learning and working, right? I've asked that many times. I can give you a little bit of an answer that I've been answered. It doesn't make sense to me. And then again, I have to say, that's true. It doesn't sound logical to me. But to other people, it's not my logic. The only thing I have to make sure of, and that's why in the civil service, is to make sure that all the laws of equality and justice are dealt with, are being, we have to be very careful on every level, whether it's to minorities or to people with disabilities and to women and to men and to this. I mean, we've passed laws in Israel about, access for people with disabilities. And today in the newspaper, it still said 39% of places of work, employment in Israel have not hired people with disabilities. They have not listened to the law. We have to change that. The we is all of us in many different ways. And so we have to always be the watchdogs of equal rights and accessibility. That's something that we all have to continuously do. Right? Again, not allowing a higher education is not what does that. There's one other thing that also I wanted to say. In a democratic country, in a liberal democratic country, there's something that I think is one of the things that are basic to its relationship to non-liberal groups, and that is the term what we call the right to exit. We have to make sure in Israel and everywhere else in the world that if you are an individual in your community, in a non-liberal, that you have so-called the freedom of choice to join this illiberal community, that there is an ability for individuals, families, groups to exit that community. I would like to suggest that in order for that right to exit to really be effective, people have to have the ability to exit and have to have the ability to work and to function in the outside world. So in a certain sense, I also think that giving higher education and making it accessible to, in this discussion, to Haredi, is we are actually implementing a very core notion in liberal democracies, and that's the right to exit. Actually, in Israel and in here also in America, not only with the Amish, but these Haredi groups, there have been individuals who have grown up and have brought to court, whatever their congressperson and things like that. And here in Israel, there was like the Ministry of Education they brought to court to say, you have not given me the possibility to leave. So how do you expect any change to happen, right? So I think that in addition, that higher education is a right, and the ways people need to study can reflect the basic liberal value of a right to culture. It also enables a right to exit. And as we know, those of us who are in education and psychology know with the Amish, at the age of 16, 17, there's this term that, they're allowed to be free, right? And then the big question is, why do over 90% of the kids come back and say, we want to join our community? I would like to suggest that one of the reasons is because they have no education and no ability to function in the outside world. That I don't think it's only mi'avat mordechai, or they just say, wow, this is the best way to live. I'm sure some do, but when you don't offer any alternatives, nobody is going to, we're not giving anybody the ability to change, to leave, to develop.
Well, we have gotten a number of additional questions. I'll stick to two, and then we'll end this program.
Okay, great.
And it's good to know that we end the program at the point that people are really eager to hear more. To those who are still on the webinar, and to everybody else, we'll be sending it also via email. Professor Hartman has just sent me an article that she and another researcher wrote about Haredi education in Israel, addressing these issues and additional issues, and we'll be sharing the article with you in the follow-up email. So a couple more questions. A number of people asked about standards. You alluded to it, but the question was, are you really able to maintain the same standards? And sort of a connected question to that is, there are elements that the ultra-Orthodox and frankly, many in the Arab community resent. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to study about it, such as the Arab, but both communities are extremely agitated when homosexuality is discussed. and scientific discovery is discussed, and the rules of and the findings of science, which are not compatible in their view to their religious beliefs. So how do you handle courses that require opening the mind and not sanitizing the thought? And the other question Daniel Haken is asking, following your comment, what's the difference between someone who says they won't sit next to an Arab in the classroom and a student who says he won't sit next to a woman?
Okay. So the notion of sanitizing the mind, I would like to begin quite a few years ago. And I did my doctorate in feminist psychology at Harvard with Carol Gilligan, and we knew that our minds were being sanitized by Erikson and Freud, telling us how we develop and how we should think and how we are going to be. I really would like to suggest that, you know, the holy priests have been produced who do not allow listening on either to women's experiences or minorities' experiences. That I wish the problem was, as they say, with a few Haredi rabbis and a few fundamentalist Islam imams. So I do not accept that my college and university education was, I had a free mind, because I didn't. And it wasn't accepted. Let's just say Carol Gilligan had to leave the psychology and move into the School of Education. So did, you know, Bob Levine and Howard Gardner, because they had different models of development. And when psychology was becoming all about brains and MRIs, there was no room for that. I teach and I work with a method that I grew up called the listening guide in research that asks different kinds of questions. That really has to say, bring that very big question mark about who said, based on what was it said. So that I think that it's very, very important that I begin the notion that my brain was sanitized in the universities. And many of our brains were sanitized in the universities. And the universities are not and have not been a marketplace of many free ideas. Until a certain point, we did qualitative research. That was not accepted as science. Now it's been accepted by the holy, you know, I'd say, you know, the holy APA. Oh, I'm so moved. And I'm one of the editors on the journal. Obviously, I have to be because I work in it. But I don't really, I grew up in the academy from when I'm little, from my home, from everything that I've done, and have been in really the best, and I'm lucky and I'm fortunate. I've been in the best of the academies. I do not buy that there was freedom of thought, etc., in such a way that enabled my experience as an Orthodox mother, or the experience of my Catholic life, my first book on Orthodox and Catholic mothers. Our experiences of mothering and how to socialize and how to educate, we're marginalized. We're not respected. We're not honored. We're talked about with a certain language that left no room for us. So it's very important for me that we do not, I will not make that or this binary thing. There is this freedom of thought, and then there's some Haredim and Muslim who don't have freedom of thought. Growing up in the academy, appreciating everything that I got from the academy, I know very well, very, very well, how minds get sanitized in certain paradigms of thought, whether it's in developmental psychology, whether it's in many other things. When I brought feminist research into Jewish texts, I was told that I am bringing my subjective experiences. And I remember, you know, my father should live, his spirit should live on, and I remember saying to him always, I said, Abba, Carol Gilligan was not at Sinai. I know that. So when I'm using some of her perspectives to interpret religious texts, I'm bringing something. But you know what? Neither was Kant. And so when certain male perspectives took over the interpretation of the Jewish tradition, that was sanitizing a whole bunch of minds and claiming truths in ways that were very, very, that marginalized many other people's experiences, many other people's perspectives, many other people's ways of being. So, and the reason I'm sorry if I sound like a little, I actually do care about these things, as you can see, it's something I care about, but I know that the Haredim do not have the monopoly on narrow-mindedness. I wish they did. We would be in such a good day. It's just like the same thing, they don't have a monopoly on many other things. But they certainly don't have a monopoly on being narrow and what's legitimate in the academic discourse. Now, what do I do with this? What is the sense? It's also of standards, etc. As a dean and as someone who goes over every single syllabus, and we train our teachers in this, and we have thousands of students, so it's not like a little thing. It's not like we took a little Haredi group, we have a little minion here and a little minion there. And so we did make a distinction, and I presented to them at the beginning with the teachers and with their and with I make a distinction between primary sources and what's called secondary sources in what do I call secondary sources? And that is like let's say, we teach often, let's say I will teach Dora to adolescents, right? And then Freud, that Freud's case study of Dora, which is a very interesting way to get into adolescence and adolescents negotiating their place in the world and the silencing of adolescent experiences. And so they have to read Freud's Dora. They have to discuss it. They have to know it. They do not very often now, teachers bring in YouTubes of this and YouTubes of that. They do not have to see a YouTube in which there is not women who are, or men who are not modest, who use non-modest language, which is something, by the way, we've learned that most of the students don't need to see that because the objectification of people in all sorts of things comes out. And it also helped us, again, with our Arab population. So in the sense, I will not compromise on if you want to study trauma, you have to do Judy Herman. There's no way you're not going to finish that course without reading Judy Herman. The question is, what are going to be the exercises around it? We try to do culturally suitable, exercises that they can then begin to integrate what they've studied into their own world, into their own lives. And so that's how we try. And so that's the sense of standards. Now, again, there are students at many different levels. I love that we bring in students. I always say, don't test our students when they come in, test them when they graduate. The idea of bringing in students who couldn't find a place in other environments, and yet you see all of a sudden how they begin to think and grow and want to learn other things, etc., is a very rewarding experience as a teacher. So now, what's the difference between saying I don't want to sit next to an hour? It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. You cannot come into a class and say I don't want to sit next to X or Y or Z. We do not accept that. And I know I'm taking up a lot of your time, and I don't want to push. If someone would like to, and if someone would like to write to me, it's okay. I can answer. I'll try. It's Tova Hartman at gmail.com. If you'd like to continue it in any way, I'm very happy to share if there's articles or if there's whatever you would like, or continuing questions, because I know there's many or there might be some people who will think about it and then would like to talk. So I'm available. Okay. And I want to thank
Professor Hartman,
for inviting me, and thank you all for coming to hear and learn together.
People have already started praising your presentation in the chat, and I know everybody truly appreciated hearing a perspective that is both anchored in science and in living experience. And I hope that those who are on this program or will be listening afterwards to both will agree that it was desirable to treat this sensitive subject, this complex subject, in 2 sessions and provide you not a debate, but rather an opportunity to hear an in-depth presentation of what it's like, and realize it's much more complex than just the platitudes, either on one side or on the other side. You've been wonderful in sharing your experience with us, and I am grateful again to our partners, Ruach Chidush, Rabbis and Kenters for Religious Freedom and Equality in Israel, JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, and for these two webinars that I hope, not for the last time, JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, and soon you'll be receiving an email with a recording, and do take advantage of Professor Hartman's invitation to reach out to her and ask further questions and receive further background. Toda, shalom to you all from Jerusalem.
Shalom, Uri, thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.